February 11, 2012. The Beverly Hilton Hotel in Los Angeles was glowing with red carpets, cameras, and laughter. It was Grammy weekend, a celebration of music. But behind one quiet door on the fourth floor, the greatest voice of her generation had fallen silent. Whitney Houston was gone. She was 48 years old. The news spread across the world in minutes. TV anchors paused mid-sentence. Radio hosts stopped the music, and suddenly the whole world seemed to hold its breath. In every city, New York, Chicago, London, Lagos, people turned up the volume as I Will Always Love You played, tears streaming down faces that had grown up with her songs. Whitney's voice had been more than music. It was light, faith, fire. A sound that could lift you, heal you, make you believe again. When she sang, you didn't just listen, you felt. Her voice was the sound of grace itself. But behind the glamour and the smile that lit up the world, Whitney carried the weight of impossible expectations. She was the golden girl, America's sweetheart, gospel's daughter, pop's perfection. Everyone loved her voice, but very few ever truly saw the woman behind it. The hotel room was quiet that night. Too quiet for a woman who once filled stadiums with her voice. And when the paramedics arrived, the music had already stopped. Outside, fans lit candles on the sidewalks, singing through their grief. The words of her most famous song echoed like a farewell. And I will always love you. For a moment, it felt as if all of America had lost its breath and its heartbeat with her. Long before the spotlight, before the Grammys, before the world called her the Voice, Whitney Elizabeth Houston was a shy little girl from Newark, New Jersey. She was born on August 9, 1963, into a world already steeped in song. Her mother, Cissy Houston, was a powerhouse gospel singer. Her cousin, Dionne Warwick, was already a star. And her godmother, none other than Aretha Franklin, was the queen of soul herself. Music wasn't something Whitney learned. It was in her blood. On Sundays, she sat in the pews of New Hope Baptist Church, her feet barely touching the floor, watching her mother's voice rise toward heaven. The choir swayed, the congregation shouted, and little Whitney absorbed every note, every emotion, every tremor of faith. By 11, she was singing solos. Her voice, raw, radiant, astonishing, made grown men weep. People whispered that God had touched her throat. At home, she practiced endlessly, using a hairbrush as a microphone, closing her eyes and imagining the crowd that would one day stand before her. But the Houston family's life wasn't all gospel and glory. The streets of Newark were rough, and the racial tensions of the late 1960s left scars. When riots broke out, the Houstons moved to East Orange, where Whitney learned what it meant to grow up between two worlds: church purity and urban struggle, faith and fame. She was beautiful, tall, graceful, with eyes full of kindness and melancholy. Modeling scouts noticed her, and by her teens she was appearing on magazine covers. But even then, she knew her destiny wasn't the runway. It was the stage. In the early 1980s, she began singing backup for her mother and later for Chaka Khan, Lou Rawls, and Jermaine Jackson. One night, while performing in a small New York club, a record executive named Clive Davis saw her. He didn't just hear a singer, he heard the future. He signed her to Arista Records on the spot. And from that moment, the shy girl from New Jersey was no longer singing for Sunday mornings. She was about to sing for the world. When Whitney stepped into a studio for the first time, the air itself seemed to change. Her voice had both the purity of gospel and the power of thunder. She didn't just hit notes, she inhabited them. The girl who once sang for God was now about to sing for everyone, and the world was about to meet a voice it would never forget. When Whitney Houston's debut album was released in 1985, the world didn't just listen, it stood still. The record, simply titled Whitney Houston, was a revelation. Songs like Saving All My Love for You, How Will I Know, and Greatest Love of All didn't just climb the charts, they redefined them. That voice, so clear and soaring, so full of grace and ache, seemed almost unreal. Critics called her the eighth wonder of the world. Fans called her an angel. Whitney's sound was unlike anything before it, a blend of gospel, pop, and soul that transcended color, culture, and class. She wasn't just an artist. She was a bridge. In a decade still marked by division, she united audiences. Her voice belonged to everyone. By 1986, she was breaking records faster than the industry could count them. Her album went platinum again and again. Her face was on every magazine cover, her songs on every radio station. And when she smiled, it felt as though the whole world smiled back. But success didn't slow her down. It ignited her. Her second album, Whitney, became the first by a female artist to debut at #1 on the Billboard chart. Hit after hit followed. I Wanna Dance with Somebody, Didn't We Almost Have It All? So emotional. Each song carried that signature balance of joy and vulnerability, a voice that could soar to heaven one moment and whisper straight to your heart the next. And then came The Bodyguard, 1992. Paired with Kevin Costner, Whitney stepped onto the big screen and proved she was more than a singer. She was a force of nature. The film's soundtrack became a cultural earthquake. I Will Always Love You, her haunting cover of Dolly Parton's ballad, became one of the best-selling singles in history. That first a cappella note, pure and trembling, remains one of the most unforgettable moments in modern music. She didn't just sing about love, she made people believe in it. Every stadium she filled, every award she collected, every stage she stepped on, she seemed invincible. But beneath the glamour, cracks were beginning to show. The relentless schedule, the pressure, the public scrutiny, they began to weigh on her shoulders. She was America's sweetheart, but that title came with a price. Every move was watched, every word analyzed, every rumor magnified. And then came the one thing fame could never protect her from: love. In 1992, Whitney married Bobby Brown, a man whose talent was matched only by his chaos. He loved her fiercely, possessively, destructively. Together they were electric and unstable. What began as passion soon turned into turbulence. Behind the mansion gates and magazine covers, their love story became a battlefield. Still, she kept performing. No matter how difficult her private life became, once the microphone was in her hand, the world fell away. On stage, she was untouchable, radiant, transcendent. She sang like a woman clinging to faith, to music, to life itself. But when the lights went down, silence returned. And in that silence, Whitney began to drift, away from the spotlight, away from the woman she once was. She had conquered the world, but she was about to face her greatest battle yet, the fight to save herself. Fame had crowned her a queen, but the crown grew heavier with every passing year. By the late 1990s, Whitney Houston was no longer just the golden girl of American pop. She was also the target of a relentless media storm. The world that once adored her now watched her stumble, waiting for cracks in the perfection it had demanded of her. The pressure of being flawless, the voice, the image, the legend, was unbearable. She was expected to be divine, never human. But Whitney was human, heartbreakingly so. Her marriage to Bobby Brown had become a whirlwind of chaos. They fought, loved, and hurt each other in front of cameras and crowds. Tabloids fed on their pain, twisting their intimacy into spectacle. In interviews, Whitney tried to smile, but the sparkle in her eyes had dulled. Behind the scenes, addiction had entered her life like a slow, merciless tide. At first it was a secret, then it was a habit. Eventually it became a war. The woman who once sang of strength and grace was now fighting her own shadow. She began missing rehearsals, canceling concerts, arriving late, disappearing for days. And when she did appear, people whispered that the voice, that impossible heaven-born voice, was fading. Every note still carried emotion, but now there was fatigue, fragility, a tremor of pain. She tried to pull herself back. Rehab, prayer, rest. Nothing seemed to hold for long. In one rare moment of honesty, she said quietly to Diane Sawyer, "The biggest devil is me. I'm either my best friend or my worst enemy." It wasn't defiance, it was confession. The people closest to her, her mother, her friends, her daughter Bobby Christina, begged her to slow down. But how do you stop when the whole world still expects miracles every time you open your mouth? How do you rest when your entire life has been about applause? Still, there were glimpses of the Whitney the world loved, moments when the fire flickered back to life. In 1998, she released My Love Is Your Love, an album filled with warmth and resilience. Songs like It's Not Right, But It's Okay in Heartbreak Hotel reminded everyone that she was still capable of greatness. She laughed again. She toured. She tried to rebuild. But the ghost never left. Every comeback came with more pressure, every performance with more scrutiny. The woman who had once defined beauty was now mocked for her fragility. The tabloids were merciless. They forgot the little girl from Newark, the church choir, the voice that had lifted millions. They forgot she was still fighting. By the 2000s, she had retreated almost completely from public life. Her body was thinner, her smile quieter. She spoke often of faith, of God, of wanting peace. She looked for it in her daughter, in music, in the rare moments of stillness when no one was watching. But fame, once unleashed, never really lets go. Then in 2009, she tried again. I Look to You, her final studio album, was her message to the world and perhaps her farewell. Her voice, older now, carried the weight of every joy and every wound. I look to you, she sang softly, and when all my strength is gone, in you I can be strong. It was both prayer and confession, the sound of a woman searching for grace in a world that had taken too much from her. 3 years later, that voice would fall silent forever. And when it did, the silence left behind was almost unbearable. Because Whitney Houston wasn't just a singer. She was proof that the human soul could still sound divine, even when it broke. When the news of Whitney Houston's death reached the world, something inside America went still. It wasn't just sadness, it was disbelief. How could a voice so full of life, of power, of heaven itself suddenly fall silent? Outside the Beverly Hilton, fans gathered through the night. They brought candles, flowers, handwritten notes. They sang softly, as if trying to fill the silence she left behind. The melodies that once lifted stadiums now echoed quietly through the Los Angeles night. I will always love you, greatest love of all. I want to dance with somebody. In Newark, at the church where she first sang as a little girl, people wept openly. Her childhood friends remembered the shy girl who used to run through the aisles barefoot. Her mother, Sissy, sat in the front pew, staring at the empty choir stand. The same walls that once shook with her daughter's voice now carried only memory. The state of New Jersey lowered its flags to half-staff. Television networks aired old performances. Her national anthem at the 1991 Super Bowl, still regarded as one of the greatest ever sung. Her interviews, her laughter, her light. And for a brief, aching moment, the world remembered Whitney not as the scandal, not as the tragedy, but as the miracle. Her funeral was held in that same church, New Hope Baptist, where her story began. Aretha Franklin sent words of love. Kevin Costner stood before the crowd, his voice breaking as he said, "You weren't just good enough, Whitney. You were the greatest." Her gold casket, covered in white flowers, glimmered in the soft church light as the choir sang, I will always love you. And when the final note faded, there was no applause, only tears. Whitney's estate would later be valued at tens of millions, her record sales soaring again as people rediscovered her music. But her real legacy wasn't money or fame. It was what her voice had done for people, how it had carried them through heartbreak, how it had reminded them that pain and beauty could live together in the same note. Whitney's music never asked for perfection. It asked for honesty. When she sang, you could hear the little girl from Newark, the church harmonies, the gospel fire. You could hear her mother's strength, her own fears, her relentless love for life itself. And though her later years were shadowed by struggle, those struggles made her art even more human. Because Whitney was not an untouchable goddess. She was one of us. She fell, she broke, she tried again. And that's why her songs still mean something. Today, her influence lives everywhere, in every young artist who dares to belt without fear, in every woman who refuses to hide her pain behind perfection, in every church choir that still raises its hands when I Look to You begins to play. She taught us that greatness doesn't mean never falling. It means always rising to sing again. When I Will Always Love You returned to number one after her death, it wasn't nostalgia. It was gratitude. The world was saying thank you for every note, every breath, every piece of herself she gave away. Because Whitney Houston didn't just leave us her voice, she left us a truth. That music, at its highest form, is not performance. It's prayer. So, the day of her funeral, the skies over Newark were gray, as if the heavens themselves had gone quiet. Inside New Hope Baptist Church, the same place where a teenage Whitney once sang barefoot in the choir, every seat was filled. Family, friends, fans, and legends of music gathered not to mourn a star, but to honor a soul. There were no flashing lights, no red carpets, just flowers, gospel, and love. Her gold casket shimmered softly beneath the stained glass windows as the choir began, "I Love the Lord." Voices rose in harmony, trembling with grief and gratitude. Even in death, Whitney's homecoming was a song. Kevin Costner spoke again, this time not as a co-star, but as a friend who had seen her heart. Whitney was not just the voice of her generation. She was the voice of our common longing. She made us feel seen, even when she couldn't see herself. When the service ended, her body was carried out of the church one final time as her own voice, "I Will Always Love You," played softly through the speakers. People wept openly. Outside, the sound of applause mixed with tears. It was the world's last standing ovation. She was laid to rest beside her father, John Houston. Just above her name, her family engraved a single line, "The Voice, now singing for the angels." And perhaps she was, because some voices are too vast, too holy, too full of life to stay here for long. Even now, more than a decade later, her songs still echo across the world. At weddings and churches, in late-night car rides, when someone needs to believe that love still saves. Every time her voice plays, the room changes. People stop, breathe, remember. Whitney Houston's story was one of beauty and battle, triumph and tragedy. But above all, it was a story of faith. Faith that even from pain can come something divine. And so the world keeps listening, not just to the notes, but to the silence that follows. Because in that silence lives the question she left us. What does it mean to touch heaven and still be searching for home